I'm just going to say right off the bat that this is a stupid video. I spent way too much time and energy on this video, and it's probably not going to get very many views, but I have to follow through because I'm that committed to the bit. Also, it's my channel, and I make the rules. Just as the title stated, I watched every single movie that has the iconic actor Steve Zahn. Steve Zahn is one of my favorite actors of all time because he gives 100% to every role, no matter how big or small. And he just seems to be a cool guy. This project has taken me a long time, but it was worth it to see all the skill and grace that this man has blessed us with over the years. Not including TV movies, documentaries, or short films, Mr. Zahn has appeared in 61 movies. And today I'm going to rank every single one. So unfortunately, I will not be talking about White Lotus today. Sorry. Obviously, with so many movies, I don't have time to go into depth on each one, so my reviews will be extremely brief unless I have something good or something funny to say. I'll be giving each film 2 different scores. A classic overall score on how good the movie is, and then a special Zahn score for how well the movie utilizes Steve Zahn. This just means if he is given a good role or not, and if the filmmakers wasted his talent. This also means that the Zahn Meter may be very different from the overall score, as sometimes the movie will be really good, but I think he was underused. Or the film may be really bad, but he gives a great performance. Additionally, both of these will be using the Letterboxd rating system of 5 out of 5 stars. And just warning you ahead of time, I'm kinda stingy with my 5 stars, so this list will only have one movie in that tier. Also, follow my Letterboxd if you want to. It'll be in the description. Alright, I have nothing else to say, so let's jump into it. Strange Wilderness is the 2008 quote-unquote comedy about the host of a wilderness-themed television show, traveling to the Andes Mountains in search of Bigfoot. I usually only reserve the half-star ratings for movies that piss me off, and that's what Strange Wilderness did. It was a mistake to watch this film sober. This is legit one of the worst movies I've ever seen. I think the filmmakers went out of their way to make it as unfunny as possible. All the attempts at comedy were lazy, cheap, and stupid. 1/2 star and a half on the Zahn Meter. The Ridiculous Six is the 2015 comedy about an outlaw who was raised by Native Americans who discovers he has 5 half-brothers. Together, the men go on a mission to find their wayward deadbeat dad. This movie is insultingly bad. Like, it is so horrendous that I'm amazed it got greenlit. And I'm amazed it has such a stacked cast. There are so many great actors that are wasted on this piece of shit. All things considered, the Zahn is utilized pretty well, even though the script sucks. 1 star and a 3 on the Zahn Meter. Unstable Fables, 3 Pigs and a Wolf Baby is the 2008 direct-to-DVD animated comedy. It's about 3 pigs who adopt a baby wolf. I was really dreading watching this movie, but it had to be done. The character designs in this movie are pretty rough, especially a lot of the wolves. Like, why do they look like that? This was obviously a movie made for 5-year-olds, so it was a tough watch. But luckily, it was free on YouTube, so I didn't have to pay for it. The Zahn still puts in effort, so I respect it. What a fever dream of a film. 1 star and 1.5 on the Zahn Meter. Chelsea Walls is the 2001 drama directed by Ethan Hawke. This movie tells 5 stories set in a single day at the famed Chelsea Hotel in New York City. This is Ethan Hawke's directorial debut, and you can really tell, as it's pretty pretentious and self-serious. Luckily, Hawke's later films are much better, as we'll see later in this video. This is one of those movies where there's no plot and it's just these little vignettes and conversations between characters, which only works if the writing is good. This was a pain to sit through because it's so boring and the cinematography is kind of ugly. Luckily, it has some good music, so it isn't a total disaster. The Zahn is alright in this film, I suppose. 1 star and a 1.5 on the Zahn Meter. Tall Girl is the 2019 teenage drama about a tall girl. I went into this movie with low expectations and it still let me down. Obviously, I'm not the intended demographic for this film, but come on, they could have at least tried to make it enjoyable. The Zahn plays the dad in this film, but he isn't giving any funny bits to work with like the Diary of a Wimpy Kids movies, so he's just majorly underused. Overall, I hated it. 1 star and a 1 on the Zahn Meter. Tall Girl 2 is the 2022 teenage drama about a tall girl. Again, I'm only ranking this one higher because they diss Maroon 5 in it. This is more or less exactly like the first one to me. Very basic, forgettable, and cliche. But once again, these movies aren't made for me, so just factor that into my rating. If you're a teenage girl, you might like this. 1 star and a 1 on the Zahn Meter. National Security is the 2003 buddy cop movie directed by Dennis Dugan. It's about two mismatched security guards who are thrown together to bust a smuggling operation. This movie is really bad. Not only is it painfully unfunny, but there's also a lot of aspects and jokes that have aged pretty badly. It was written by the guy who made Norbit and directed by the guy who made Jack and Jill, so what do you expect? I hated this movie and I refuse to say more. 1 star and a 2 on the Zahn Meter. Freak Talks About Sex is the 1999 indie comedy about two friends who spend their days smoking pot and talking about sex. And yes, that is the actual logline from IMDb. I feel bad talking trash on this movie since it's an indie movie that was probably made on the budget of $5 and a ham sandwich. But this movie just isn't very good. The main character is kind of insufferable, and there's some really long scenes that try some attempts at comedy, but they just don't land at all. The Zahn tries to save this movie, but it's a lost cause. 1.5 stars and 3.5 on the Zahn Meter. Night at the Museum, Kamen Ra Rises Again is the 2022 animated adventure comedy about a young night guard at a museum who must stall the evil Kamen Ra from taking over the world, or something like that. I can't remember. This film is just an 80-minute slapstick chase sequence. The plot is thin, the jokes are weak, and overall, it's just not a great kids movie. But what can you expect from a direct-to-streaming animated sequel to a beloved film series that features none of the original actors? It's a very uninspired quasi-sequel that is so painfully dull. The Zahn voices Jedediah, who is Owen Wilson's character from the original series, and he does a good job, but he's barely given any lines or anything to do. During my Zahnathon, it was movies like this that tested my faith and commitment. But I made it through to tell the tale. 1.5 star and 1.5 on the Zahn Meter. Escape from Planet Earth is the 2012 animated comedy that follows astronaut Scorch Supernova as he finds himself caught in a trap when he responds to an SOS from a notoriously dangerous planet called Earth. There are two types of kids' movies. Movies that are made for families and movies that are made for just kids. Unfortunately, this film is the latter. This was a pretty basic, by-the-numbers animated kids movie. It has a few good bits, but overall it relies too heavily on slapstick humor and a very simple plot. The Zahn has a very minor role and is not utilized to his full potential. 1.5 stars and a 2 on the Zahn Meter. Management is the 2008 film about a traveling art saleswoman who tries to shake off a flaky motel manager who falls in love with her and won't leave her alone. This movie is very bizarre. It's supposed to be a rom-com, but it's not very romantic and it's not very funny. I couldn't tell if it was supposed to be satire or something, but it just comes off as very awkward. Either I'm too stupid to understand the film, or the film just sucks. The Zahn has a lead role and does a good job, but it's not enough to save this film from being a stupid waste of time. 1.5 stars and a 3 on the Zahn Meter. Forces of Nature is the 1999 romantic comedy about a soon-to-be married man who encounters an exciting stranger after his plane suffers an accident on takeoff. I did not care for this movie, largely due to the reasons I did not like Management. It's supposed to be a rom-com, but it's not funny or romantic. Not only that, but the movie just looks butt ugly. Like, the cinematography is so muddy, and it looks like a trip-hop music video, or that you wouldn't download a car commercial. Also, Ben Affleck is not very likable in this movie, and the overall message of the film is really weird. The Zahn has a very minor role, and he isn't given any funny material to work with. 1.5 stars and a 1.5 on the Zahn Meter. Gringa is the 2023 indie drama about a troubled teenager who runs away to Mexico to find the father she has never known. I could not for the life of me get invested in this movie. It doesn't do anything egregiously bad, but it was just so boring. I could see this working for some people, but to me, I did not care about any of the characters and the plot felt very meh. There's this loose narrative of the main character joining a soccer team, but it never fully commits to being a sports movie, so it's in this weird in-between place. I don't have much to say about this movie, and I always feel bad when I talk trash on indie films, so I'll just end it there. The Zahn is alright in this film, nothing really of note. 2 stars and a 2.5 on the Zahn Meter. Your Place or Mine is the 2023 rom-com about two long-distant best friends who change each other's lives when she decides to pursue a lifelong dream and he volunteers to keep an eye on her teenage son. If you haven't noticed yet, I am not a fan of rom-coms, and this one is no different. It's pretty forgettable and basic, but most importantly, it's boring. They must have written the script for this movie in like a weekend because it is so basic and so plain. I'm only giving it extra credit because it features a lot of songs from The Cars, and I love The Cars. The Zahn is good in the few scenes that he has. 2 stars and a 3.5 on the Zahn Meter. Dr. Dolittle 2 is the 2001 comedy that follows Dr. Dolittle and his quest to save a forest by getting 2 bears to mate. For a family comedy, I was not expecting as many sex jokes as there were in this movie. This film kinda sucks, but what do you expect from Dr. Dolittle 2? You're not going in expecting Citizen Kane. The overall message was nice, but the plot and the characters leave a lot to be desired. The Zahn voices the main bear in this film, and he honestly gives a pretty great performance. 2 stars and a 4 on the Zahn Meter. Daddy Daycare is the 2003 comedy about 2 men who get laid off and have to become stay-at-home fathers when they can't find jobs. This inspires them to open their own daycare center. I'll be honest, I watched this movie when I was a kid, and I really didn't want to rewatch it for this video, so I'm judging this movie on the very foggy memories I have. This is from the same director who made Dr. Dolittle 2, so just rewatch what I said about that film. Although the Zahn has the funny I'm your daddy scene in this movie, and Cheap Trick is in it, so it's slightly better than that film. 2 stars and a 3 on the Zahn Meter. Chain of Fools is the 2000 crime comedy about a colorful cast of characters trying to track down a valuable set of coins after they are stolen. This movie was trying way too hard to be quirky. There is a cast of all very eccentric characters played by some surprisingly big stars, but as a whole they all fail to come together and play off each other effectively. The movie feels like a dollar bin ripoff of Pulp Fiction that never quite gets into the right rhythm. Regardless, there's a few funny bits and the Zahn does a good job. Although, Elijah Wood was my favorite character as he plays a 17-year-old hitman who's pretty funny. 2 stars and a 3 on the Zahn Meter. Alright, we have the last film in the 2-star tier, and it's Employee of the Month, which is the 2004 dark comedy about a man who is having the worst day ever after getting fired from his job and being broken up with by his fiancée. This movie was pretty boring for most of the runtime, but then something really interesting happens in the third act which I thought was going to save the film. There's a really great twist, but then there's another twist, and another, and another, and another, and another until it kind of ruins the film. It felt like the heist episode from Rick and Morty. This movie thinks it's cooler than it actually is. The Zahn does a great job as a wacky side character. Those are just my favorite Steve Zahn performances, when you can tell the director just told him to be as goofy as possible and he goes for it. 2 stars and a 4 on the Zahn Meter. In the time that I've been working on this video, I upgraded my mic, so that just shows how long I've been working on this. Alright, let's go to 2.5 stars. Night Train is the 2009 direct-to-DVD mystery horror movie about 3 strangers on a train who come across a mysterious object in a box that a dead man was carrying, and they all wish to keep it for themselves. Night Train is very unremarkable. It has some decent intrigue, decent horror, decent twist, and decent writing, but it never quite lands in the territory of a good movie. It has some rough CGI and a lot of it is very melodramatic, which is not helped by the over-the-top score that is prevalent throughout. But it's a direct-to-DVD horror movie, so what do you expect? The Zahn is alright in the film, but he's pretty forgettable along with the rest of the film. 2.5 stars and a 2.5 on the Zahn Meter. Calvin Marshall is the 2009 indie comedy drama about a college student who is determined to be a Major League Baseball star, but finds his true calling instead. This movie was actually filmed in the town where I went to college, so I kinda know some of the people who worked on this film. It was really cool to see some of the locations I recognized on screen. Unfortunately, the film was pretty boring and not really my cup of tea. The Zahn puts on a great performance, and I always love how he's willing to star in these little indie movies. 2.5 stars and a 3.5 on the Zahn Meter. Stuart Little is the 1999 family film about a family that adopts a mouse as their son. Yeah, I don't really like Stuart Little. I never saw it when I was a kid, so it doesn't have the nostalgia factor for me. This is a movie that was made for kids, so there's not much here for me to enjoy. I don't really know what else to say. It's just not very good. The Zahn has a very minor role voicing a cat, but he does a good job, so there's that. 2.5 stars and a 3 on the Zahn Meter. Stuart Little 2 is the 2002 family film that follows Stuart Little as he is drafted into the Vietnam War. Obviously I'm joking, but can you imagine? At least the movie would be interesting then. Yeah, this is more or less exactly like the first movie in my mind. He has a relationship with a bird in this one, so that's cool, I guess. It's hard to talk trash about these movies because they're so wholesome and inoffensive. This is definitely a movie that you would be shown at like a church camp or something. The Zahn is barely in this one though, so that kind of sucks. 2.5 stars and a 1.5 on the Zahn Meter. Hamlet is the 2000 drama set in modern-day New York City and is an adaptation of Shakespeare's immortal story about Hamlet's plight to avenge his father's murder. Other than the costumes and the sets, there's not much that makes this retelling distinct or different from any other one. If you're going to make a Hamlet set in early 2000s New York, there should at least be a reason behind it. Not only that, but this film has some very stilted performances, which is weird since the cast is so stacked. I blame the director on this one, as this movie has no reason to exist. The Zahn has a very minor role, but he gives one of the only good performances in the film, so there's that. 2.5 stars and a 3 on the Zahn Meter. Chicken Little is the 2005 animated film that follows a courageous chicken who must come to the rescue of his fellow citizens when aliens start an invasion. If I had a nickel for every time Steve Zahn played a pig in an animated kids movie, I would have 2 nickels. Which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it's happened twice. This was my first time rewatching this film since I saw it when I was a kid, and I gotta say, it's not as good as I remember. It's a pretty underwhelming film that has some real pacing issues towards the end of the movie. Also, I forgot how mean everyone in this town is to Chicken Little in this movie. Like, geez, these are grown-ass adults and they're straight up bullying this child. Also, can you believe that this movie cost $150 million to make? You could make 18 hoodwinks for the price of one Chicken Little. That's crazy. 2.5 stars and a 3.5 on the Zahn Meter. Now we have the last film in this tier, Where'd You Go, Bernadette? Where'd You Go, Bernadette is the 2019 drama by Richard Linklater. It's about a loving mom who becomes compelled to reconnect with her creative passions after years sacrificing herself for her family. This film never really finds its stride. It has unique characters, great actors, and an interesting message and something to say, but never really comes together to form a cohesive picture. I expected more from Linklater since I really like most of his work. The Zahn is only in this movie for about 30 seconds, so I feel like I wasted my time watching this movie. 2.5 stars and a 1 on the Zahn Meter. We've reached the point in the video where all the movies after this are movies that I consider good, or at least not bad. But I also wanted to use this time to take a little break from the ranking and talk a little bit more about the Zahn.
Surround sound.
Steve Zahn was born in Marshall, Minnesota on November 13th of 1967. Ever since high school, it seems like he was born to be a star, as he acted in school plays and became a 2-time Minnesota State speech champion. The Zahn attended Gustavus Adolphus College for 1 semester, but dropped out after seeing the original West End production of Les Mis. This production is what inspired him to pursue an acting career. As he stated in an interview with Vulture, "I remember sitting through the second act thinking, I'm as good as that guy standing on the barricade. I wanted to be a part of the circus." This led him to enroll in the Institute for Advanced Theater Training at Harvard University, where he earned a Master of Fine Arts. The Zahn originally got his start acting on stage in various productions, most notably in a 1991 to 1992 national tour of Bye Bye Birdie. On this tour, he met his wife, the author and theater artist Robin Peterman. They married in 1994 and are still together to this day. While playing opposite Ethan Hawke in Sophistry at Playwrights Horizon, he was noticed by Ben Stiller, who cast him and Hawke in Reality Bites. After his breakout role in Reality Bites, the Zahn quickly gained a reputation for playing goofy comic relief characters in many iconic films, such as That Thing You Do, You've Got Mail, and Out of Sight. And that's the range where most people know him from, the wacky sidekick. However, as we'll see from later in this list, he is a very capable actor that can do all kinds of genres and all kinds of leading roles. Speaking of which, let's get back into the list with all the movies that are in the 3-star range. Safe Men is the 1998 crime comedy about 2 bad singers who are mistaken for top safecrackers at a bar, and a gangster boss orders them to break into 3 safes or else. This was probably the biggest disappointment on this list, because the stacked cast and plot description really had me hyped. But unfortunately, this film is painfully mediocre. It felt like a wannabe Coen Brothers movie, but none of the comedy lands like it does in any of the Coen Brothers work. It's mildly amusing, but at the end of the day, very forgettable. Also, it felt like the Zahn wasn't given proper material to suit his style, since he plays the straight man in this film. Paul Giamatti was great though, love that guy. 3 stars and a 2 on the Zahn Meter.
Sweet stash, man.
Thanks, bro.
The object of my affection is the 1998 romantic comedy about a pregnant New York City social worker who begins to develop romantic feelings for her gay best friend and decides she'd rather raise her child with him, much to the dismay of her overbearing boyfriend. This is a fine movie. The actors do a good job, there's some good dialogue, and the story is alright, but it just wasn't for me. As I've stated many times, I'm not a rom-com guy, and this movie is no different. There was at least a little more heart to this one compared to the others at the bottom of this list. The editing was kinda weird, and the score sounded like royalty-free music, which I did not like. The Zahn has a minor supporting role, and he doesn't do anything crazy. 3 stars and a 3 on the Zahn Meter. The Great Buck Howard is the 2008 comedy drama about a young man who, much to the chagrin of his father, becomes the new assistant to an illusionist in decline. This movie has a decent script, decent editing, and pretty good performances, but nothing is necessarily exceptional about this movie. The plot is kinda simple, and it feels like nothing truly interesting happens. But at the same time, it's not necessarily boring. There's not any great comedy, but at the same time, there's no bad comedy. This film is an anomaly to me. It's a movie I would usually dislike, but I kind of like it? I don't know, it's weird. The Zahn has a minor role, but he's still pretty funny. 3 stars and a 3 on the Zahn Meter. Wildcat is the 2023 biographical drama directed by Ethan Hawke that follows the life of writer Flannery O'Connor while she was struggling to publish her first novel. This movie tells its story in a fractured way, as the main narrative goes in and out of vignettes of some of Flannery O'Connor's short stories. I respect this film for doing something original and interesting with the biopic genre, but at the same time, it didn't quite land with me. The fragmented storytelling is an interesting concept, but it never truly comes together in a cohesive manner. The Zahn has a smaller role, and I didn't really like the material he was given, which was a bit of a disappointment. 3 stars and a 2 on the Zahn Meter. Blaze is the 2018 biographical drama, also directed by Ethan Hawke, that is a reimagining of the life and times of Blaze Foley, the unsung songwriting legend of the Texas outlaw music movement. My thoughts on Blaze are very similar to my thoughts on Wildcat, as Blaze also has some nonlinear storytelling that is interesting, but not always effective. I liked this film a bit more since I have a soft spot for musical biopics, but this movie also takes its time and feels a bit long-winded. The Zahn once again has a very small role, but I liked his performance in this one a bit better. 3 stars and a 2.5 on the Zahn Meter. Sunshine Cleaning is the 2008 drama comedy about a mom who starts a biohazard removal/crime scene cleanup service with her sister to raise money to send her son to a private school. Yeah, this movie is pretty forgettable. It tackles the themes of grief and loss pretty well, but it doesn't do anything wildly original or interesting to leave a lasting impact. But it still has some good moments of comedy and touching scenes to keep it afloat. The Zahn has a very minor role and doesn't do anything too impressive. There's really not much to say about this movie. 3 stars and a 2.5 on the Zahn Meter. Race the Sun is the 1996 comedy drama that follows a group of misfit students in Hawaii who compete in an international solar car challenge. This is the type of movie that would be shown in your 8th grade science class at the end of the school year. It's a perfect example of an okay movie. It knows what it is, it doesn't take any risk, and it tells its story pretty plainly. Not bad in any way, but not really good either. Just okay. The Zahn plays an evil European, which was pretty funny to see since it's a little bit out of his wheelhouse. 3 stars and a 2.5 on the Zahn Meter. Joyride is the 2001 thriller about 3 young people on a road trip who must escape a psychopathic trucker after they pranked him on a CB radio. I know this might be a bit controversial since I know this is a bit of a cult classic, but I didn't really care for this film very much. It has a few good scares, a few good tense scenes, and some decent characters, but completely middle of the road to me. The finale was a bit underwhelming in my opinion and not really what I wanted to see. The Zahn has a main role, but I don't really like his character, so there's that. 3 stars and a 3 on the Zahn Meter. The Good Dinosaur is the 2015 animated Pixar film about a dinosaur and a human who become unlikely friends and go on a grand adventure. This was a very underwhelming movie. Since it was Pixar, I had my expectations set really high, and this movie let me down. It might be my least favorite Pixar movie of all time. You know what? Yeah, I think it is. I even like Cars 2 more than this. The plot is very simple, the message is very cliche, and the characters are kind of annoying. The Zahn has a nice little role as the antagonist, but the whole character feels like more of an afterthought and doesn't have much of an impact on the overall plot. disappointing movie. 3 stars and a 3 on the Zahn Meter. 8-Bit Christmas is the 2021 Christmas film about a 10-year-old kid in 1980 Chicago who sets out on a quest to get the Christmas gift of his generation, the latest and greatest video game system. Obviously, I'm not the first person to say that this movie is heavily inspired by the Christmas Story. But you can't review this movie without at least mentioning it. It's very much cashing in on that movie's nostalgia, the 80s nostalgia, and Christmas nostalgia. But it's done a lot better than I was expecting out of a direct-to-streaming movie. It's not the greatest thing in the world, but it's sweet and tells a decent story, so it's good in my book. The Zahn plays a slightly unhinged goofball dad character, which is an archetype you'll see pop up a lot more on this list. But hey, he does it well, so I love that. 3 stars and a 4 on the Zahn Meter. Saving Silverman is the 2001 comedy about a pair of buddies who conspire to save their friend from marrying the wrong woman. This is one of those stupid 2000s screwball comedies in the vein of those early Adam Sandler movies. And these type of films are really hit or miss with me. Luckily, I enjoyed this film a lot more than I thought I would, as it has some pretty funny jokes. However, I've never been much of a Jason Biggs fan, and he's the main character, so he drags this movie down for me. Luckily, the movie is saved from being terrible by the performances by the Zahn and Jack Black. 3 stars and a 4.5 on the Zahn Meter.
Coming on, yeah!
Now we have the last film on this tier, and that is Banditas. Banditas is the 2006 comedy western about 2 women who go on a bank robbing spree to combat a ruthless enforcer threatening their town. This movie is a little rough around the edges, but it's still a lot of fun. Penelope Cruz and Salma Hayek play off each other really well and are the highlight of this film. The Zahn is given a lot of great stuff to work with as well. Unfortunately, it's bogged down with some weak pacing and editing. Still, it's pretty fun and worth a watch if you enjoy this type of film. 3 stars and a 4 on the Zahn Meter. Alright, now we're on to the next tier, which I think has the most films out of any tier. I don't know, I'll have to go back and count these. 3.5 stars. Riding in Cars with Boys is the 2001 biographical drama about a single mother who dreams of becoming a writer that has a son at the age of 15 in 1965 and goes through a failed marriage with the drug-addicted father. I bet this film would really hit if I was a teen mom, but believe it or not, I'm not a teen mom. It feels a little melodramatic at times and it's a bit too long in moments, but overall, it's still a good movie. The performances are what really shine in this film, as the writing and technical elements are pretty basic. The Zahn has a very important role in this film where he is carrying a lot of the emotional weight of the story, and he does a fantastic job. It's probably the top 5 performances of his career, honestly. 3.5 stars and a 5 on the Zahn Meter. That's right, a 5. Diary of a Wimpy Kid is the 2010 comedy about a 12-year-old psychopath and incel Greg Heffley. Okay, he's not a psychopath. I'm only joking. Kind of. Back when I was a kid, I was a huge, and I mean huge, Diary of a Wimpy Kid fan. I read all of the books and I saw all of the movies when they were released in theaters. So these movies were my first introduction to the Zahn. And what an impression he has left. He is so great in this movie and he is utilized so well. He nails the character of Frank Heffley and is a highlight of this franchise. These movies hold a special place in my heart, but I can't let nostalgia blind me too much, and I must rank them somewhat fairly. 3.5 stars and a 4 on the Zahn Meter.
Don't call me. Don't come by my house. We're done.
Diary of a Wimpy Kid, Roderick Rules is the 2011 sequel to the original Diary of a Wimpy Kid. All the movies in this franchise are pretty interchangeable in my book. I think this one is slightly better though because it has Peyton List and I had a huge crush on her when I was a kid. Also, I think Frank Heffley has some funnier lines in this movie, particularly centered around the party that Greg and Roderick throw.
What was General Grant doing on the thermostat?
Another classic in my book. 3.5 stars and a 4.5 on the Zahn Meter. Diary of a Wimpy Kid Dog Days is the 3rd and final installment into the greatest trilogy of all time. This is at the top of the list because Greg's relationship with his dad in this film is one of the major plot lines, and it's done really well. It's a very relatable and layered relationship that is tackled in a great way, and the film treats it with care and respect. Greg and his dad have some really touching scenes together, and some really funny scenes together.
Go to the basement and work on my battle diorama.
These movies would not be as good if the Zahn wasn't in them. 3.5 stars and a 4.5 on the Zahn Meter. Uncle Frank is the 2020 comedy drama about a young girl who goes on a road trip with her uncle to her grandfather's funeral. This is a pretty good movie. I was really impressed with Paul Bettany, who gives a fantastic performance. But I still have a few gripes with this movie. The story is told through Sophie Lillis' character, and we don't learn much about her over the film. The movie also feels a bit like Oscar bait. Or, I guess it would be Emmy bait, since it was technically a TV movie. The Zahn has a small role, once again, playing a dad. 3.5 stars and a 2.5 on the Zahn Meter. Suburbia is the 1996 comedy drama directed by Richard Linklater. It's about a group of suburban teenagers trying to support each other through the difficult task of becoming adults. Richard Linklater is the best at making movies about nothing, and I mean that as a compliment. This film is basically an evil version of Dazed and Confused, set in the 90s. It's kind of a downer, but it has some great dialogue and great characters in it. The characters are so insufferable, but they also feel so realistic because of the level of insufferable they are. You've met people like this in real life, no doubt. It's not an amazing film, and it's far from the best on this list, but for some reason, this is the movie that has stuck in my mind the most throughout my Zahnathon. I don't know why I keep thinking about this movie. I'm pretty sure it's due to the characters. The Zahn brings some comic relief even though he's playing a douchebag. Solid movie, but not for everyone. 3.5 and a 4.5 on the Zahn Meter. Shattered Glass is the 2003 drama that tells the story of a young journalist who falls from grace when it's discovered he fabricated over half of his articles from the publication The New Republic magazine. I like this movie. It tells an interesting story and it has some solid acting in it. What stood out to me was Hayden Christensen's performance, as I've only seen him in the Star Wars prequels and Jumper. He is great in this film and was a pleasant surprise. Really, the only thing I would have liked is if it had a bit more pizzazz to the execution, as the movie tells its story in a pretty standard fashion. It lacks some tension and flavor. I feel like this is a movie that a director like Adam McKay would absolutely crush. The Zahn has a small part, and he's solid. Good movie overall. 3.5 stars and a 3 on the Zahn Meter. Reality Bites is the 1994 coming-of-age drama comedy directed by Ben Stiller. It's about a documentary filmmaker and her fellow Generation X graduates facing life after college, who are looking for work and love in Houston. As I stated earlier, this movie is the Zahn's breakout role, and led to him getting cast in many other movies. I enjoyed this film, as I felt it perfectly captured that post-college feeling well, and portrayed it in a way that is still relevant to this day. That's what I enjoyed most and felt like the film excelled in, as the romance in this movie I could just not get into. The Zahn is great, but he just needed some more screen time, as he wasn't given many scenes to truly shine. But the scenes he does have are fantastic. 3.5 stars and a 3.5 on the Zahn Meter. Out of Sight is the 1998 crime film directed by Steven Soderbergh, about a career bank robber who breaks out of jail and shares a moment of mutual attraction with a U.S. Marshal he has kidnapped. The main draw of this movie is the romance between George Clooney and Jennifer Lopez, as they have some great chemistry and great scenes together. As for the editing, the movie has a lot of freeze frames and fades, which could feel cheesy, but for some reason they really work in this movie. I couldn't tell you what I didn't like about this film, as there's no big glaring issues that I can think of. This is more of a case that the film didn't personally speak to me, and I liked other films on this list more. The Zahn once again plays a supporting goofball / idiot character, and he does it well. 3.5 stars and a 4 on the Zahn Meter. Speak is the 2004 drama about a teenager who is traumatized into silence after a disastrous summer party. Anyone who has ever said that Kristen Stewart is a bad actor obviously didn't see this film, because she gave a stunning performance. And at 13 years old too, that is insane. The movie really takes its time and moves pretty slowly, but the last 30 minutes hit you with so much emotion that it makes the slow pace worth it. This film really reminded me of Edge of 17 and Perks of Being a Wallflower, so if you liked those films, I definitely recommend checking out this one. It's super underrated. The Zahn plays a hippie art teacher in this film, and he does it perfectly. 3.5 stars and a 4.5 on the Zahn Meter. You've Got Mail is the 1998 romantic comedy directed by Nora Ephron that follows a book superstore tycoon and an independent bookshop owner who fall in love from the internet, both blissfully unaware that he's trying to put her out of business. What's so weird about this movie is Tom Hanks' character is basically the villain of the story, but at the same time, the movie makes you understand and root for him. This is down to Tom Hanks' natural charisma, but also due to the great chemistry that he has with Meg Ryan. This movie is really charming. Although it's not the type of film I would actively seek out, I can understand why it's so beloved. Nora Ephron has such a skill at crafting these cozy rom-coms that I can't help but respect it. The Zahn has a supporting role but executes it well. 3.5 stars and a 3.5 on the Zahn Meter. Knights of Badassdom is the 2013 comedy slasher about a group of LARPers that accidentally summon a succubus from hell. I'm sure I have this film way higher than most people would, but I'm sorry. I enjoyed this movie so much. The comedy and the concept was right up my alley, and I loved the way they blended the humor with the over-the-top horror. It has a real low-budget quality, which sometimes works in its favor, but sometimes doesn't. The practical effects were really cool, and the Zahn gave a pretty great performance, along with the rest of the cast. I highly recommend you check this one out. It's a hidden gem. 3.5 stars and a 4.5 on the Zahn Meter.
Verily, there be a fungus among us.
On to the last film in this tier, and it is Leroy, Texas. Leroy, Texas is the 2023 dark comedy directed by Shane Atkinson. The logline is as follows. When Ray discovers that his wife is cheating on him, he decides he's going to kill himself. His plans suddenly change when a stranger mistakes him for a low-rent hitman. There are so many of these small indie films that the Zahn has been in that are so underrated, and this one is no different. You can really feel the Coen brothers' influence on this film, which is great since they are my favorite directors of all time. Although the comedy doesn't quite hit as good as the Coen brothers, this is still a solid crime film that has plenty of twists and turns and plenty of iconic characters. I just really like movies that follow pathetic losers, and this movie had a great one in the lead. The Zahn is also amazing in this film and brings his comedic chops to the forefront. This is Shane Atkinson's directorial debut, and I'm really excited to see what he will do in the future, as I think he has lots of potential. 3.5 stars and a 4.5 on the Zahn Meter. Time to move on to the 4-star tier, and the first film we have up is Happy Texas. Happy Texas is the 1999 comedy that tells the story of 2 escaped convicts who end up in a small town in Texas where they're mistaken for a gay couple expected there to help with the small girl's beauty pageant. Originally, I had this film in the tier below, but the more I've sat and thought about Happy Texas, the more I've come to enjoy and appreciate this film. I loved this movie way more than I thought I would. I know the logline sounds like it could be pretty problematic, but this movie has a lot of heart and was not as offensive as I thought it would be. I enjoyed the romance subplot in this movie the most, which is weird since that's one of my least favorite genres. The Zahn, of course, gives a fantastic performance, and this role even won him an Independent Spirit Award for Best Supporting Male. However, this film is really brought together by William H. Macy, who plays his role with such sincerity that it gives the film its charm. Just like the last 2 films, this is an awesome gem of a movie that I totally recommend. 4 stars and a 4.5 on the Zahn Meter.
I'm just gonna come over to your house late at night when you're asleep and kill you with the chainsaw.
Lean on Pete is the 2017 drama about a teenager who gets a summer job working for a horse trainer and befriends the fading racehorse Lean on Pete. Lean on Pete takes place and was shot in Oregon, so of course I'm going to be biased. But it's still just a great film. This film is so raw and real in a way that doesn't overdo the drama into melodramatic territory. The performances feel so natural and you really get lost in this movie. It reminded me a lot of The Florida Project, and like that film, I will be thinking about this movie for quite a while. Definitely one of the more overlooked films in the A24 catalog. The Zahn plays a very minor role, but he delivers. 4 stars and a 4 on the Zahn Meter. Cowboys is the 2020 drama about a troubled but well-intentioned father who has recently separated from his wife, who runs off with his trans son into the Montana wilderness. This is just a beautiful film. Not only does it look great through the awesome cinematography and color grading, but it also tells a very moving story. The characters in this film are so well fleshed out, and the dialogue is delivered by some fantastic performances. This is another career best by the Zahn, who is just so good at playing these troubled dad characters. Some of the non-linear storytelling didn't quite work for me, and I wanted to see more of the detective character's backstory, but other than that, it's a really great film. 4 stars and another 5 on the Zahn Meter. A Perfect Getaway is the 2009 mystery thriller about 2 pairs of lovers on a Hawaiian vacation who discover that psychopaths are stalking and murdering tourists on the islands. I enjoyed this film way more than I thought I would. I went into it expecting a cliche B movie, but It was actually a really solid thriller, and it had a really great plot twist. The performances in this movie were great all around, and there were some really solid moments of tension. My only gripe is at some points it had to break the momentum of the story in order to get exposition out of the way. The Zahn plays a screenwriter in this film, so there's a lot of meta jokes that may seem on the nose for some people, but I liked them. Overall, it's a solid thriller and really surprised me. 4 stars and a 4 on the Zahn Meter. Rescue Dawn is the 2006 drama telling the real-life story of a U.S. fighter pilot's epic struggle of survival after being shot down on a mission over Laos during the Vietnam War. Also known as the movie where Christian Bale eats maggots. Ooh, this movie was a hard watch. Not because it's a bad movie, but because the characters suffer so much in the film. It's a great movie and has some great performances in it. Of course, Christian Bale is amazing in the lead role, but geez, Steve Zahn acted his ass off in this film. He really surprised me in this movie, since before I started this project, I only knew him as a comedic actor. Reportedly, he lost 40 pounds for this role. Oh my gosh, one of his all-time greatest performances, no doubt. 4 stars and a 5 on the Zahn Meter. Now we have the last film on this tier, and probably another hot take of mine, but I just love this movie so much. Sahara is the 2005 action-adventure directed by Breck Eisner. It's about master explorer Dirk Pitt as he goes on an adventure of a lifetime, seeking out a lost Civil War battleship in the deserts of West Africa. This movie has been one of my guilty pleasures for such a long time. I think it's super underrated and it gets way too much hate. It has a lot of cool adventure, some interesting action set pieces, and a killer soundtrack. The behind-the-scenes drama is also pretty wild if you want to check out my video on it. It has a bonkers plot and a fair amount of problems, but I still love this movie. The Zahn is playing a character that is a bit out of his Q zone, but he is still great. He's not quite at his full potential though. 4 stars and a 4 on the Zahn Meter. Alright folks, we are in the home stretch as we only have 5 films left in the list. If you've been watching this long, thank you so much, I appreciate it. Dallas Buyers Club is the 2013 drama that follows Ron Woodruff in 1980s Dallas, who works around the system to help AIDS patients get the medication they need after he is diagnosed with the disease. Matthew McConaughey crushes this role, and he definitely earned that Oscar he got. This movie really hinges on his performance, and he delivers with some seriously powerful scenes. My only gripe would be that the film's third act is really weak, and it feels like the filmmakers couldn't focus on a strong climax for the story. I get that this is a bit of a stupid complaint since it's based on a true story, but it still stands. Also, my mortal enemy Jared Leto is in this movie, which I also didn't like. The Zahn has a minor role, but he brings the right level of complexity needed for the film. 4.5 stars and a 3.5 on the Zahn Meter. Captain Fantastic is the 2016 road trip drama by Matt Ross. It's about an off-grid family that must reintegrate into society when their mother passes away. Man, this movie is fantastic. I went into it blind and was blown away by the performances and the script. It has some really great dialogue, and the messages and themes leave you with a lot to think about after the credits roll. The Zahn has a very minor role, and it's more serious, so it's not very high on the Zahn Meter. But overall, still a really great film. 4.5 stars and a 3 on the Zahn Meter. War for the Planet of the Apes is the third installment into the new Planet of the Apes saga and the end of the Caesar trilogy. It's directed by Matt Reeves, and the logline is as follows. After the apes suffer unimaginable losses, Caesar wrestles with his darker instincts and begins his own mythic quest to avenge his kind. Jeez, this film is amazing. It was the perfect conclusion to the Caesar arc and a solid installment into this franchise. I know it's been said before, but I feel like these Planet of the Apes movies are slept on. They are all solid, and I even like the new one, which I know has been a bit divisive. The villain in this movie is one of my favorites, and I love the themes that they play around with in this film. The only thing that holds it back from the 5-star rating is that it slows down a bit in the middle. The Zahn completes this movie with the character of Bad Ape, which brings this series some much-needed comedic relief. Another all-time great performance by him.
Oh no! No, 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 no. Okay.
4.5 stars and a 5 on the Zahn Meter. That Thing You Do is the 1996 comedy drama directed by Tom Hanks. It's about a local Pennsylvania band that scores a one-hit wonder in 1964 and rides the star-making machinery as long as they can. If you've never seen this film before, turn this video off right now and go watch it. It is such a good movie and is full of heart and great comedy. If you're a big music or music biopic fan, you will definitely love it. Tom Hanks is super underrated as a director, as this film has such great direction and such a distinct creative voice. The Zahn is fantastic and gives my favorite performance of his career.
Here's the thing, we're not the Wonders right now, we're Captain Geach and the Shrimp Shack Shooters.
He has so many great comedic moments, and this is the role that he was born to play.
Oh, I'm not here with these fellas. I got a pigging competition over at the Livestock Pavilion, and I am gonna win that blue ribbon.
The only thing that holds this film back from a perfect score is that it ends a bit abruptly. 4.5 stars and a 5 on the Zahn Meter. It's time for the final movie on this list and the only movie in the 5-star tier. Like I said before, I'm really stingy with my 5-star ratings, so I only reserve them for films that I see as perfect. And that's what this last film is. Crimson Tide is the 1995 drama directed by Tony Scott. The logline is as follows. On a US nuclear missile sub, a young first officer stages a mutiny to prevent his trigger-happy captain from launching his missiles before confirming his orders to do so. I am so glad I started this Steve Zahn project because this was my first time even hearing about this movie. This is a perfect film. The way it uses tension is a masterclass, and it's able to build and keep its tension throughout without losing a beat. I was legit sweating by the end of this movie. This is largely thanks to the stellar score done by Hans Zimmer and the fantastic editing done by Chris Lebenzahn. It has amazing dialogue and some interesting themes about war and morality that leaves you thinking well after the movie has ended. It does a great job at staying mostly neutral on a lot of these issues where you can see both sides of the argument. And of course, you have some top-notch performances by some of the greatest actors of all time. All that being said, the Zahn has a very, very small role in this film and isn't given much to do. So although I'm still giving it 5 stars, I'm only giving it a 1.5 on the Zahn Meter. It's kind of ironic that the film I have on the top of this list, the Zahn is only in for about maybe a minute of screen time. But hey, that just says something about how underrated he is and how Hollywood needs to give him more lead roles. Steve Zahn is what some might categorize as a character actor. A character actor is an actor known for playing unusual, eccentric, or interesting characters in supporting roles, rather than leading ones. It's a very loose term and is somewhat abstract and open to interpretation. It can also be described as actors that make you go, oh hey, I know that guy, or wait, I've seen that guy before.
Oh, that guy!
For example, in addition to the Zahn, some of my favorite character actors are Stephen Root and John Carroll Lynch. Character actors are absolutely my favorite type of actor, and in my opinion, an underappreciated art form. Throughout his career, the Zahn has been typecasted into different kinds of roles. I noticed there was an evolution through his career as he got older, and I've split these into 3 different categories. When he was young, he often played the slacker/stoner supporting character in a lot of smaller roles like Suburbia, Out of Sight, and Forces of Nature. In the middle of his career, he got a lot of goofball/nerdy/aloof characters, oftentimes as the lead, such as his roles in Banditas, National Security, and Management. And now in the modern age, he gets cast as the dad character in both mainstream films like Diary of a Wimpy Kid and the Tall Girl franchises, but also smaller indie dramas like Gringa or Cowboys. Of course, he's played many roles outside these archetypes, but those were the ones that I saw cropping up pretty often. I found the most fun watches in this project was when he played a character that was totally out of his wheelhouse, like an evil European in Race the Sun, or an action star in Sahara. As I worked my way through his filmography, one thing I also noticed is that he is open to any type of film. Very often he lends his talents to really small indie films, and he fully commits to them too, which is awesome to see. But at the same time, he's not afraid to go for big budget franchises and blockbusters, like War for the Planet of the Apes and Sahara. However, an unfortunate theme I also noticed is that he's in a lot of movies that didn't do the best at the box office. With some of these films it was deserved, such as Strange Wilderness, but other films deserve a lot more attention, like Happy Texas. Speaking of which, here are my top 5 most underrated films on this list that I would definitely recommend you check out. Additionally, here are my top 5 Steve Zahn performances throughout his career that I all ranked a 5 on the Zahn Meter. You should also check these films out. So in conclusion, this project was a lot of fun. because I was introduced to a bunch of films that I would have never watched before. Even though many of them were bad, watching them gave me more appreciation for the good ones in the catalog. Let me know if you like this video. It's pretty different from my regular content and took a lot more research than my regular content, so it would be good to know if it paid off. There's so many more actors whose filmographies I would also love to binge and make videos about, like Paul Giamatti, Paul Dano, and Christian Bale. But if you have any suggestions of other actors' catalogs I should check out, I would love to hear them in the comments below. Whew. Yeah, that's all I got. This has been Tom from Eisenhower Productions, and thank you so much for watching. See you next week.